Have you ever held a perfectly still, silent space within yourself? A sanctuary of calm you've spent years cultivating, only to watch in disbelief as a storm walks right through the door and makes itself at home? Have you ever wondered, with an ache in your soul, why your peace seems to be a magnet for chaos? Why your quiet heart, the one that longs for nothing more than gentle resonance, finds itself so often entangled with a whirlwind of a human being, a beautiful, brilliant, intoxicating tempest that leaves you breathless and broken, all at once? This isn't a coincidence. It is not a curse. It is a sacred contract your soul signed long before you ever met them, a curriculum of the heart designed to alchemize your peace into power. This is the story of how the most profound inner stillness calls forth the wildest storm, not to be destroyed by it, but to learn how to finally command the weather of its own soul. Her name was Ilara, and her life was a study in deliberate tranquility. She was a landscape artist, but not the kind that simply arranged flowers and stones. She was a composer of silence, a weaver of serenity. Her clients, people with loud lives and cluttered minds, would hire her to create gardens that felt like sanctuaries, outdoor rooms where the soul could exhale. She worked with the subtle energies of the land, the quiet language of water and wind, the patient strength of ancient trees. Her hands, often smudged with the rich, dark earth, moved with a quiet reverence. She believed that peace wasn't a destination to be reached, but a frequency to be tuned into, and she had made it her life's work to become a living tuning fork for that exact vibration. Her home was a reflection of this ethos. It was a small, reclaimed cottage nestled at the edge of a forgotten forest, a place where the modern world's frantic hum faded into the rhythmic pulse of the seasons. Mornings were for meditation, for sitting with a cup of herbal tea as the sun's first rays filtered through the leaves of the great oak that stood sentinel outside her window. The light would dapple across the worn wooden floors, and in those moments, Ilara felt a profound connection to everything. There was no separation between the stillness in her heart and the stillness of the dawn. It was all one beautiful, coherent song. Her days were spent in the gardens of others, creating harmony. Her evenings were for her own garden, for reading books on spiritual psychology and ancient botany, for sketching the delicate architecture of a fern or the confident posture of a blossoming rose. She lived in a state of inner peace power, a quiet strength she believed was unshakable. She had healed the wounds of a tumultuous childhood, faced her shadows in silent retreat, and cultivated a still mind-strong spirit. She was, by all accounts, a woman who had mastered the art of being peaceful. And then she met Julian. He wasn't just a person, he was an event, a meteorological phenomenon. He came into the small art gallery where she was displaying a series of her garden photographs, and the quiet, contemplative energy of the room immediately recalibrated around him. He moved with a restless grace, a kinetic energy that seemed barely contained by his own skin. His eyes, a shade of deep, stormy gray, didn't just look at things, they consumed them. He spoke with a passion that bordered on ferocious, his hands gesturing as he articulated a point about a particular photograph. His voice, a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up into Ilara's chest. He was a musician, a composer of chaotic, brilliant, soul-bearing symphonies that were celebrated in circles far from Ilara's quiet world. He spoke of his music as a way to wrestle with his demons, to give them a voice so they wouldn't tear him apart from the inside. He was all raw edges, exposed wires, and a vulnerability so profound it was both terrifying and utterly captivating. He looked at Ilara's photographs of serene, sun-dappled glades and dew-kissed petals, and he saw not just beauty, but a mystery he desperately wanted to solve. "How do you get it to be so quiet?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with a genuine wonder that disarmed her completely. He was standing before her largest piece, a photograph of a single water lily floating in a perfectly still, dark pond, its reflection an unbroken mirror image. My world is never this quiet. I don't think my mind has been this quiet for a single second of my entire life. In that moment, Alara didn't see a chaotic man. She saw a wounded soul, a heart that beat to a frantic, painful rhythm, searching for a moment of respite. And her own peaceful heart, the one she had so carefully nurtured, did what it was conditioned to do. It opened. It felt a surge of profound, aching compassion. She saw his chaos not as a warning, but as an invitation to share her stillness, to offer him a sanctuary within herself. It was the most natural, instinctual response in the world for her. It was also the beginning of her most profound and painful lesson. Their first few weeks together were a dizzying fusion of two worlds. He would pull her into his universe of late-night recording sessions, where music was born from a place of raw, untamed emotion. The air would be thick with the scent of old wood, ozone from the amplifiers, and the electric charge of creation. She would watch mesmerized as he wrestled with melodies, his body language a physical manifestation of the music itself. A sudden, triumphant chord, a frustrated running of hands through his already wild hair, a moment of transcendent stillness when the final note hung, perfect and fragile, in the air. He would then collapse, spent and utterly vulnerable, and turn to her with eyes that said, "Did you see me? Did you understand?" And she did. She understood the language of his soul, even if the dialect was foreign to her own. In return, she would bring him into her world. She took him to her cottage, to the forest at dawn. She taught him how to listen past the noise in his head, to hear the subtle conversation between the wind and the leaves. She showed him how to hold a handful of earth and feel its life force, its patient, grounding energy. He would sit with her in her garden, and for fleeting, miraculous moments, the restlessness would leave his body. He would watch a bee move from blossom to blossom with a look of childlike wonder. He would lie in the grass, his head in her lap, and close his eyes, and a semblance of peace would smooth the harsh lines from his face. "You're like magic," he would whisper, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You're the only quiet place I've ever known." For Alara, his presence was like a vibrant, exotic color she had never known existed, suddenly painted across the pale, gentle palette of her life. His intensity made her feel intensely alive. Her quiet world, which had always felt complete, now seemed muted, in comparison to the symphony of feeling he brought with him. She had mistaken her peace for a complete emotional spectrum, when in reality it had been a carefully curated and limited range. Julian, with his volatile passions and his soaring ecstasies, was showing her all the notes she had been afraid to play. This is the first and most seductive reason why the peaceful person magnetizes the chaotic lover, the law of energetic polarity. In the realm of spiritual psychology, we understand that the universe is in a constant dance of seeking balance. Light and shadow, silence and sound, stillness and motion. They are not enemies. They are two faces of the same whole. When we have cultivated one aspect of our being to an extreme degree, even a positive one like peace, our soul, in its infinite wisdom, will often call forth its polar opposite. It does this not to punish us, but to invite us into a greater state of wholeness. Ilara's deep, practiced stillness had created an energetic vacuum, a powerful pull for the very energy she had, on some level, disowned or suppressed within herself. The raw, untamed, chaotic energy of pure, unbridled life force. She had learned to be gentle, to be calm, to be serene. But where was her rage? Where was her wild, ecstatic joy? Where was her capacity for righteous anger, for setting a firm, unyielding boundary? These are not negative energies. They are vital aspects of the human experience. By living only in the serene end of the spectrum, She had inadvertently created a profound craving for the other half of the equation. Julian was the embodiment of that other half. He was everything she was not, and her energy field recognized his as the missing piece of a puzzle she didn't even know she was solving. Think of it like this. If your inner world is a perfectly calm, pristine lake, it will inevitably reflect the sky above it. If you are constantly cultivating that calmness, you may one day look up and find yourself irresistibly drawn to the most dramatic, thunderous, lightning-filled sky imaginable. The contrast is breathtaking. The energy is electrifying. The reflection of that chaotic sky on your still water is a sight to behold, a fusion of two powerful forces creating something entirely new. For a while, this dance can feel like the most profound love story ever told. The chaotic one finds a sanctuary, a place of rest. The peaceful one finds excitement, a thrilling sense of aliveness. It feels like a sacred connection, a perfect fit. But a lake cannot remain still while a hurricane rages above it forever. Eventually, the reflection is not enough. The wind begins to whip the surface into a frenzy. The rain begins to blur the lines between the sky and the water. And the peaceful one, who once felt so grounded and centered, finds themselves lost in the very storm they were so mesmerized by. This transition for Alara was subtle at first, insidious. It began with small compromises of her peace. Julian's life did not operate on a schedule. It was governed by the unpredictable tides of his creative muse and his emotional state. He would call her at 3 in the morning, his voice alight with a new melody, and his excitement was so infectious that she would push aside her own need for restorative sleep to listen, to be the anchor for his creative lightning. He would promise to join her for a quiet evening at the cottage, and then disappear for 2 days, only to resurface with a whirlwind of apologies and a story of a sudden, all-consuming recording session he simply couldn't escape. She, the master of creating serene and predictable environments, found her life becoming anything but. Her morning meditations were interrupted by his late arrivals or the lingering energy of an argument from the night before. Her garden, her sacred space, now sometimes felt like a waiting room, a place she paced while wondering where he was, if he was okay. She told herself this was the nature of loving a passionate artist. She told herself that her peace was strong enough to hold his chaos, that her stillness could be a gift, a healing balm for his turbulent soul. This is the second, deeper layer of the magnetic pull, the activation of the healer archetype. Peaceful, empathetic people are often deeply connected to the nurturing, compassionate energy of the divine feminine. They feel the pain of the world, and their instinct is to soothe it. When they encounter a person like Julian, a soul so clearly in the grips of deep-seated pain and trauma, this healing impulse goes into overdrive. The peaceful person sees the wounded child beneath the chaotic adult. They see the brilliant light struggling to break through the clouds of their inner turmoil, and they believe with every fiber of their being that their love, their peace, their steady presence can be the medicine that finally heals the other person's wounds. What is your deepest, most instinctual response when you see someone in pain? Do you feel a pull to move toward them, to offer comfort, to try and fix it? Or do you feel the need to protect your own energy? There is no right or wrong answer, but your honest answer to that question holds a profound key to understanding your own relational patterns. For the person who embodies peace, the pull to heal is often an automatic, subconscious drive. This dynamic creates an incredibly powerful and often addictive connection known as a trauma bond. It is not a bond of healthy, reciprocal love, but one forged in the intense cycle of pain and relief. Julian's chaos would create a crisis. He would have an emotional outburst, a fit of jealousy, or a period of dark, withdrawn silence. This would plunge Alara into a state of anxiety and fear. Her peaceful inner world would be shattered. She would then work tirelessly to manage the situation, to soothe him, to reassure him, to bring him back from his emotional ledge. And when she succeeded, when he finally softened, pulled her close and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I'd do without you. You're the only thing that makes sense." The relief she felt was immense. It was a chemical rush of dopamine and oxytocin, a feeling of being essential, of being the one person who could calm the storm. This cycle, chaos, anxiety, soothing, relief, became the rhythm of their relationship. The highs were stratospherically high, forged in the intensity of making up after a fight. The connection felt deeper, more meaningful than any simple, peaceful love she could imagine. He needed her. His need felt like love. Her ability to soothe him felt like a purpose. This is the great illusion of the healer in an unbalanced relationship. They mistake being needed for being loved. They mistake the temporary cessation of pain for the presence of genuine joy. Her friends began to notice the change. "You seem tired, Alara," one might say gently. "We miss having you on our Saturday morning hikes." She would make excuses, defending him, defending the beautiful complexity of their connection that they just couldn't understand. But deep down, she knew. The tiredness wasn't just physical. It was a soul-level exhaustion. It was the fatigue that comes from constantly pouring your own life force into a vessel that has a hole in the bottom. The energy of love, is meant to be a reciprocal flow, an exchange that nourishes both people. In her relationship with Julian, it had become a one-way transfer. She was the power source, and he was the beautiful, mesmerizing, and perpetually draining device. The turning point came on a cool autumn evening. She had been planning a special dinner for him. It was the anniversary of the day they met at the gallery. She had spent the afternoon preparing his favorite meal, filling her small cottage with the warm, comforting sense of roasted garlic and thyme. She lit candles, put on a soft instrumental album, one that wasn't his, and waited, and waited. An hour passed. Then two. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She texted, her messages going from hopeful to worried to a cold, sinking dread. The food grew cold. The candles burned down. By midnight, she was sitting in the dark, the silence of her cottage no longer feeling peaceful but hollow and mocking. It was a silence defined by his absence. He finally arrived just before dawn. He didn't burst in with a whirlwind of apologies. He slipped in quietly, his face pale and drawn. He didn't offer an explanation. He just sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands. The scent of whiskey and stale cigarette smoke clung to him, a smell that was entirely alien to her sacred space. Alara looked at him, at the debris of her carefully planned evening, at the exhaustion etched onto her own soul, and for the first time, she didn't feel the familiar surge of compassion. She didn't feel the pull to rush over to soothe him, to make it all okay. All she felt was a profound, echoing emptiness. She looked at this man she loved, this chaotic force of nature, and she realized something that shook her to her very core. She had been trying to create a garden in the middle of a hurricane. And in the process, she had allowed all of her own beautiful, carefully tended plants to be uprooted and destroyed. She had sacrificed her peace on the altar of his pain, and in the end, neither of them was healed. He was still lost in his storm, and she had lost her sanctuary. She looked around her home, her sacred space. It no longer felt like hers. It was charged with the energy of his drama, his unpredictability. She walked over to the window and looked out at her own garden, bathed in the soft, gray light of the coming morning. She saw the sturdy oak, the resilient ferns, the rose bushes preparing for their winter sleep. They were her teachers. They knew how to be rooted. They knew how to bend in the wind without breaking. They knew how to draw nourishment from the deep earth and turn it into beauty. And they never, ever abandoned their own essential nature for the sake of a passing storm. In that moment of devastating clarity, a new concept began to dawn in her consciousness. the concept of energetic sovereignty. This is a core teaching in the journey of spiritual growth journey. It is the understanding that your energy, your life force, your inner peace is your most precious resource. It is the soil from which your entire life grows. And you alone, are the sovereign ruler of that inner kingdom. You get to decide who and what you allow into your energetic field. You get to decide what you are willing to nurture and what you must weed out. The divine feminine energy that was so strong in Alara is the energy of compassion, of nurturing, of unconditional love. It is a beautiful, life-giving force. However, for that energy to be sustainable and powerful, it must be held within the container of the divine masculine. The divine masculine energy is the energy of structure, of boundaries, of discernment, of conscious action. It is the part of us that can say, with love and with unwavering clarity, no, this far and no further. My peace is not negotiable. It is the energy that builds the garden walls, not to keep love out, but to create a safe and sacred space for the most beautiful love to flourish within. Alara had an abundance of divine feminine energy. She could love, nurture, and forgive endlessly, but she had a profound deficit of healthy divine masculine energy. She did not know how to protect her own sacred space. Her no was hesitant, her boundaries were permeable, and she had allowed her desire to heal him to override her own soul's instinct for self-preservation. Julian's chaos wasn't the problem. The problem was the gaping hole in her own energetic fence. The universe, in its infinite and sometimes painful wisdom, had sent her the biggest possible storm to show her exactly where her walls needed to be built. Are you a giver, a nurturer? Do you find it easier to extend compassion to others than to yourself? Do you believe on some deep level that setting a boundary is unkind or selfish? This is a crucial area of inquiry for anyone on a path of healing through awareness. A boundary is not an attack. It is a declaration of self-worth. It is the ultimate act of self-worth healing. It is telling the universe and the people in your life, I honor the energy that I am. I am worthy of a life that feels peaceful and safe, not because I am avoiding challenges, but because I am consciously choosing to cultivate a sacred inner environment. That morning, as Julian slept the sleep of the emotionally exhausted on her sofa, Alara took a piece of paper and a pen. She walked out into her garden, the damp morning air cool on her cheeks. She sat on her favorite stone bench beneath the great oak, and she began to write. She didn't write a letter to him. She wrote a letter to herself. She wrote a declaration of energetic sovereignty. She acknowledged the part of her that was drawn to his pain. She honored her compassionate, healing heart. She thanked it for its desire to love so deeply. And then, with tears streaming down her face, she began to write out her new terms and conditions. She wrote down what her peace felt like, what it smelled like, what it sounded like. She described her sacred mornings, her need for predictability, her requirement for reciprocal energy. She wrote, "My heart is not a rehabilitation center. It is a sacred temple, and only those who are willing to enter with reverence, respect, and a commitment to their own healing are welcome to worship here." When Julian finally woke up, she didn't confront him with anger. The Alara of the past would have, perhaps with a flurry of anxious questions or tearful accusations, which he would have met with his own brand of defensive, manipulative chaos. But this was a new Alara, an Alara who was beginning to integrate her own divine masculine. She made him a cup of tea. She sat with him in a calm, grounded silence until he was fully awake. And then she spoke her truth. "Julian," she began, her voice quiet but as solid as the oak tree outside her window. "I love the man I know you are in your heart. I love the brilliant, beautiful music that comes from your soul. But I can no longer live in the storm that surrounds you. It is not my storm to calm." She didn't blame him. She didn't shame him. She simply stated the reality of their energetic incompatibility. She explained that her own journey required her to make her inner peace the number one priority, not as a selfish act, but as an act of devotion to her own soul. She told him that she could not continue to be the anchor for his ship until he learned how to navigate his own waters, to fix the holes in his own hull. He reacted, of course. There was pleading, there was anger, there were promises to change, the same promises she had heard a dozen times before. But this time something was different. She wasn't swayed. Her compassionate heart felt the pain behind his words, but her newfound strength, her strong spirit, held the line. She was not abandoning him. She was finally, truly choosing herself. She was choosing soul-level love, and that love had to begin with her own soul. Leaving a chaotic lover, especially when a trauma bond has been formed, is one of the most difficult and courageous acts of self-love a person can undertake. It is an act of emotional alchemy. It is taking the lead of a painful, codependent dynamic and consciously choosing to transform it into the gold of self-worth and sovereignty. It feels like a death, because in many ways it is. It is the death of the healer fantasy. It is the death of the belief that your love alone can save someone from themselves. And it is the death of the version of you who was willing to sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of being needed. The weeks and months that followed were a profound journey of reclamation for Alara. The silence in her cottage was, at first, deafening. It was filled with the ghost of his presence, the echo of his laughter, the phantom charge of his drama. She had to sit with the intense discomfort of her own solitude, a solitude she had once cherished but had now become entangled with the pain of his absence. She had to face the part of her that had become addicted to the chaos, to the adrenaline rush of the highs and lows. This is the hidden gift of the chaotic lover. They churn up all the parts of ourselves that we have been peacefully ignoring. Alara's peace had been, in some ways, a form of spiritual bypassing. She had been so focused on cultivating serenity that she had avoided the messier, more difficult emotions within herself. She had avoided her own deep-seated fear of abandonment, a wound from her childhood that made her cling to Julian even when it hurt. She had avoided her own anger, her own power, her own voice. Julian, in all his destructive glory, had forced her to face every single one of those shadows. The chaos he brought into her life was merely a mirror, reflecting the unhealed chaos that still existed, dormant, within her own subconscious. She began to work on her own garden again, but this time the work was different. It wasn't about creating peace, it was about cultivating strength. She started a new project, building a rock wall at the edge of her property. The work was physically demanding. She hauled heavy stones, her muscles aching, her hands becoming calloused. Each stone she placed was a prayer, a physical manifestation of the boundaries she was now building within her own psyche. She was literally and metaphorically fortifying her own sacred space. She began to play with the wilder side of her own nature. She took a dance class, something that felt awkward and foreign at first, but slowly she learned to let her body move in ways that were powerful and expressive, not just gentle and graceful. She started listening to loud, passionate music, even his music, not with a sense of longing, but with a new appreciation for the fire of raw emotion, a fire she was now learning to tend within her own hearth, rather than seeking it from an external source. She was integrating the storm. She was becoming a woman who could be both the still, deep lake and the lightning-filled sky. She was achieving a state of mindful intimacy with all parts of herself. The ultimate lesson of this dynamic, the core of why peaceful people magnetize chaotic lovers, is this. The universe is not trying to pair you with your perfect partner. It is trying to pair you with your perfect teacher. And for the soul who has mastered peace but not power, the chaotic lover is the ultimate, and often most painful, PhD-level course in energetic sovereignty and radical self-love. They come into our lives to show us where we are leaking energy, where our boundaries are weak, where we are abandoning ourselves in the name of loving another. When you learn this lesson, when you do the work of healing your own codependent patterns and integrating your own divine masculine strength with your divine feminine compassion, something miraculous happens. Your energetic frequency fundamentally changes. You are no longer a quiet harbor broadcasting a signal that says, "In need of repair, storm-tossed ships are welcome here." Instead, you become a lighthouse. A lighthouse does not run all over the coastline trying to save every ship. A lighthouse stands firm in its own power. It is rooted, solid, and unshakable, and it shines its light clearly and consistently out into the world. It doesn't discriminate. It simply shines. The ships that are lost, the ships that are sailing in the wrong direction, will use its light to course correct. And the ships that are whole, that are on a clear and conscious path, will see its light and recognize it as a beacon of another conscious vessel. They will sail towards it, not out of a desperate need for salvation, but out of a resonant desire for connection. When Alara finally reached this state, her magnetism was completely transformed. She was more peaceful than she had ever been, but it was a different kind of peace. It was not a fragile, delicate stillness that needed to be protected from the world. It was a deep, powerful, rooted peace that could not be shaken by any external storm, because she had finally befriended the storm within herself. Her still mind was now supported by a truly strong spirit. She no longer attracted chaos, she attracted wholeness. One day, months later, she was working in the garden of a new client, her hands deep in the earth, her face turned up to the sun. A man walked over. He was the architect for the house that was being built on the property. He moved with a quiet confidence, a calm centeredness that she recognized instantly. It was not the hollow stillness of someone suppressing their emotions, but the integrated stillness of someone who had journeyed through their own inner landscape and had made peace with what they found there. He didn't look at her garden with the desperate wonder of a man lost in a storm. He looked at it with the appreciative eye of a fellow creator, someone who understood the principles of structure, flow, and sacred space. "You have a real gift," he said, his voice calm and clear. "You don't just create beauty, you create a feeling of coming home." Lara smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that came from the very depths of her reclaimed soul. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time she felt the spark of attraction without the accompanying red flag of a healing project. It was not the frantic, addictive pull of polarity. It was the calm, joyful, easy hum of resonance. It was the energy of two lighthouses, shining their lights across the water, acknowledging each other in a shared understanding of strength, purpose, and conscious connection. Your journey of healing through awareness is the most sacred journey you will ever take. The people who come into your life are not random. They are assignments. The chaotic lovers, the emotional tempests, they are your most challenging and your most potent teachers. They are sent to you to help you transform your energy, to force you to claim your power, to teach you the art of self-worth healing until it becomes second nature. They are there to help you awaken your own awakened heart. If this story of Alara has stirred something within you, if you recognize the echo of your own journey in her pain and in her triumph, I invite you to honor that recognition. Your story is valid. Your pain has a purpose, and your capacity to heal and transform is infinite. In the comments below, share one boundary you are choosing to build in your own life, one small act of reclaiming your energetic sovereignty. By sharing, you not only empower yourself, but you become a beacon for others in our beautiful community, the quiet Mythos. This is a space for conscious relationships, for spiritual psychology love, and for the profound journey of discovering the soul-level love that begins with the self. Remember to subscribe and join us on this path. Your peace was never meant to be a gift you gave away to calm someone else's storm. It was always meant to be the unshakable foundation upon which you build your entire world. The chaos was never the destination. It was the fire that forged the unbreakable diamond of your own powerful, sovereign spirit. Now go and shine.